Alrighty, Deadly Tarantula Girl coming to you from my laptop in Texas. We were doing a little bit of herping last night in the beautiful sunny state of Texas. And so I was fortunate enough today to steal some time away from Ray Morgan, who is the mind behind the interviews. He is an absolute amazing man. He's currently in Costa Rica, which we're going to hear all about. And so, unfortunately, being deep in the jungle, he does not have the bandwidth for video today. So I'm going to interview him, and you're going to have to see my lovely face the whole time. So, good afternoon, Ray. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. So, like I said, I'm not at home in my regular studio. Ouch. I just got shocked by my partner here. I'm going to be reading your comments off of a mobile device. So please jump on. Let's see. It looks like we've got a couple of people already jumping on here. So thank you to you guys who are watching live. So, gosh, so much to say. Ray, tell us a little bit about kind of how you got started in the animal world and a little bit about your history.
Okay. Well, I think I started pretty much the same way everybody did. I had a fascination with dinosaurs when I was, 4 or 5 years old. And then I think I was about 7 years old when I got my first snake, which was a garter snake. That seems to be the overwhelming majority of people's first snake is garter snake. So that's what I had. And then I think by the time I was about 10, it was pretty clear that that was not a passing phase. I had the garage completely full of gopher snakes and king snakes and other things that were common in the area. And then not too long after that, I discovered that, wow, I can buy snakes from other parts of the world. And so then had various exotic pythons and all kinds of crazy stuff. Eventually took over the garage to where I had almost floor-to-ceiling cages all around the perimeter, and then an island of rats and hamsters in the middle,
That's awesome.
to feed them.
So now I know that before Costa Rica, you were in LA. Are you California born and native?
Yeah, I lived in Southern California essentially my whole life, up until about 5.5 years ago when I moved down here to the northern part of Costa Rica. I'm up in the mountains on Lake Arenal, so it's a nice area. But as you mentioned, it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere.
It is. That must be great and awful sometimes.
Well, yeah, there's pros and cons to it. I like being kind of far from anything. The downside, obviously, is connectivity is a bit tough. I'm about 7 miles down a pretty rough, unpaved road to get to the nearest town, and even the nearest town is not much of a town. It's a little tiny place. But I have a view out my window of a volcano, and I have a yard full of, I think we're up to 23 or 24 species of snakes that we found right around the house. So the wildlife here is phenomenal. So I'll take it.
I can imagine. So tell me a little bit about your educational background. Is it in science? Is it in film? Because you're heavily invested in both at this point.
Yeah, so by education, I'm a software engineer, of all things. Yeah, so I'm, in terms of the world of herpetology, I'm kind of the weird guy who likes to follow the literature. I read published papers on everything that is connected to what I'm working with. And since most of my time deals with venomous animals, I spend most of my time in terms of self-education, reading literature in connection with venomous animals. I don't have a formal herpetology degree, but I think most of the people that I work with on various projects either do have a proper degree or they're medical doctors or scientists of some other stripe.
Okay. So tell us a little bit how you transition from native non-venomous to getting interested in venomous animals.
Well, venomous animals obviously have an extra dimension to them that makes them interesting. They have a different mechanism of defending themselves and acquiring prey than king snakes or gopher snakes or racers or anything do. And so there's something a little bit interesting about them. And then in terms of caging and handling, it's an entirely different thing. You don't have to worry about getting bitten too awful much by gopher snakes.
Right.
And you don't have to worry about things like secondary containment, which you do with venomous animals. So there's an extra layer of complexity to it, and the inner nerd in me kind of gravitates toward that. I have a tendency to gravitate towards things that are as difficult as possible.
That makes me interested in what kind of woman you like.
She's complicated too.
Awesome. She sounds great. So,
she's awesome.
So at what point did you start? I know that you have done some pretty in-depth film projects with the Venom Interviews. At what point did you decide to escape modern society and run off into the jungle?
Probably when I was about 7, but I didn't manage to do it. Probably didn't manage to do it until I started the Venom Interviews. Amazingly, the project started almost exactly 9 years ago. It was September of 2010.
Wow!
When the idea of doing a documentary film for the herpetology world hit me, and there was a couple of different subjects that I considered. One was dealing with the invasive Burmese pythons in South Florida. But at the time, it sounded like somebody else was also working on a similar project, and I didn't want to collide with that effort. And so around that same time, I started being really bothered by the fact that the way that venomous reptiles and the people that work with them were portrayed in the media was just awful. Yeah. It was just, it was made to be as scary as possible and as dangerous as possible. And so the question occurred to me that, aren't these things interesting enough by themselves? If they're interesting enough that they show up in the media all the time, but if they're that interesting, why do we fictionalize them as badly as we do? So the Venom Interviews kind of started as a test of the idea whether all this is interesting if you don't have the sensationalism and you don't have the overly dramatic host and the overly dramatic music, and you take all that away and you deal with the real people who do the real work. Is that interesting? And the long and the short of it is that it turns out that it's really, really interesting. And the project gained a large enough following that when the time it was released in March of 2016, it was welcomed by the community. They were very enthusiastic about it. They kept me going in the years that it took to put it together.
Wonderful. So I have been trying to get my hands on the DVD for a little while, and I've not seen the full thing, but I've seen all the little snippets that are on YouTube. So first of all, where do people get it? First of all, I want to know.
Yeah, so if you go to thevenominterviews.com, that is, so there's 2 formats available now. The DVDs are unfortunately sold out, but Blu-rays are still available. And it is available streaming, and there's a link to it.
Awesome.
It's streaming on Vimeo. So if you either go to thevenominterviews.com and follow the link there, or you just Google the Venom Interviews Vimeo, you'll find it. It's pretty easy to find.
Good. So do you pay a fee to rent it temporarily, like an Amazon Prime movie, or? Yeah, it's kind of like that. I think it's around $8 or something. And I think that's a 3-day rental, if I remember correctly. And the DVD, the Blu-ray is $29. And so there's still some of those available, but there's not a lot of them available. And once this batch is sold out, there probably won't be any more physical media produced. So they're becoming something of a collector's item. Wow. Get yours today.
Yeah. You snooze, you lose.
Exactly. So just from the snippets that I've seen several authorities in the hobby that you've interviewed. Pete Memicos is one of my friends, so that was fun to watch him.
Oh, yes.
So how did you choose the people that were going to be involved in the project?
That's a good question. So I started, I think the original list was about 100 people. And so my initial vision for it was, okay, I only want professional people. I want medical doctors, herpetologists, zoologists, people who run venom labs or do venom research.
Uh-huh.
That it was really more focused on the professional and scientific aspects of the topic than on the hobbyist.
Uh-huh.
But it does turn out that the line between those is not very sharp.
Yeah.
A huge number of the people who work professionally with the animals in all different capacities had the same kind of childhood fascination that I did. The parallels are remarkably similar, as you see it in the introduction to the film. But so the majority of the people who are professionals are or have been private keepers as well, and some of them reproduce animals, and some of them work with animals that are very difficult to keep alive.
Right.
And so they've figured out husbandry things that in the private sector that had not been figured out previously.
Right.
So the focus of the film is on the professional and scientific aspects of venomous herpetology, but it does overlap quite a bit into the hobby as well. It talks about things like what makes a responsible keeper. It talks about what you need to know about antivenom. There's a series of chapters that give you probably, not to brag too much, but probably the best short crash course in the technology of antivenom that you're likely to find.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it was. So there's a lot of information in there that is geared toward a private sector audience, even though the experts in the film, and it ultimately was narrowed down to about 35 people that appear, I think 35 or 37 that appear in the film, even though that they are professional people, scientists, doctors, and so forth, the audience is really geared toward the private sector. I made the movie that I wanted to see that nobody was making.
Interesting. So how long did that film take you from beginning to end?
Oh my God, my whole life. It took well, so filming started in September of 2010.
Okay.
And it took about a year to do all the filming, and then it took about 3.5 or 4 years to get it edited. It was a long, long time. And for one thing, I had to learn how to tell a story and how to make a movie. And when you start with 60 some hours worth of source material, and you have to get it down to 2 hours, there's a lot of different ways you can cut that up to make a story out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't clear. I think it was probably maybe a year into editing before the story that was emerging really became clear.
Wow.
And so what's interesting is the story that emerges is kind of this what I've called a collective biography of the interest that starts in childhood and develops into a more advanced hobby, and then becomes a professional career, and then the film wraps up with kind of various people talking about retrospectives of their careers. And you mentioned Pete Mimikos, and Pete was fantastic, and he actually opens the film. He has some key parts in the beginning of the film, and Pete actually has the last word. The very closing scene of the film was his as well. So he bookended it very, very nicely.
Interesting. Wow, I love that. Yeah, he's a very interesting man. So that was fun to hear some familiar names and see some familiar faces. Wow. So you started filming in 2010. You filmed for about a year, and then the editing. So did you do the editing yourself? Did you hire a team or?
No, that was really the reason that took so long. Is I did all the principal photography myself, all the principal cinematography myself, which is hard enough to do. I was a fairly good photographer, going into the project. I mean, I understand how cameras work and how lights work, and
Uh-huh.
and I had done some audio engineering in my past, so I had
Okay.
kind of a foundation of skills, but I'd never put together anything, anything of the magnitude of a 2-hour
A feature-length
feature film.
film.
Yeah, that was definitely biting off more than I could chew. And then to do all of it myself was probably not something that I would do again. It was definitely doing it the hard way. On the current projects, which I guess we can talk about, I'm working with a little bit larger team. I have a couple of editors and stuff, and so spreading that work around is definitely a better way to preserve your sanity. Doing it all of yourself is
Yes.
tough.
So here's a slightly personal, maybe off-topic question. So what did you do to arrange funding for this whole project? Was it just something that you did personally, bit by bit, as you could? Did you have a sponsor helping you out?
Yeah. Well, so the short answer is it was all on my dime. I funded the entire production, and it was ultimately funded by, I'd worked a career in technology, so I had a little bit of funds in the bank that would get me through production, and even through editing, I still did some contract work to keep, to earn some money to keep the lights on. But it was completely self-funded, and that was by design. And the reason for that is I had a very clear vision about what I wanted and what I didn't want. I definitely did not want something that was fictionalized and sensationalized the way the other media had been. The entire purpose of the project was to avoid that. And if I was accepting money from investors, they're going to want to follow a formula that works, and a formula that works is to make it as sensational as possible.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do that, so I bit the bullet and funded it all myself. And I don't know if the project will ever break even financially, but it's certainly been incredibly rewarding otherwise.
Awesome. That's really interesting. Okay, so tell us, you were about to then branch out into some of your more current projects that you're working on.
Yeah, so just as we were releasing, in fact, I think it was the week that the Venom Interviews was released, I got a call from Leslie Boyer, who's a physician and toxicologist at the University of Arizona. And she said, are you interested in working on snakebite in sub-Saharan Africa? And I said, well, I'm kind of out of gas, but tell me what's the idea? And so the idea was to produce a series of training videos for doctors and nurses in sub-Saharan Africa.
Wow.
And to give you an idea of the scale of the problem with snakebite there. So snakebite kills or injures somewhere around, well, it's solidly north of 500,000 people a year. It's probably 600,000 or so. Wow. Probably between 100 and 140,000 fatalities. About half of those are in India, and a good portion of the other half are in sub-Saharan Africa.
Wow.
And so it's a huge number of fatalities. To compare it to the U.S., for example, so here where I am in Central America, the fatalities by snakebite per capita are about 70 times what the U.S. is, which sounds like a lot, but the U.S. really, snakebite is essentially a solved problem. Western Europe, snakebite is very close to being a solved problem. The fatalities are very low. But by comparison, sub-Saharan Africa and India, for that matter, are between 2,000 and 3,000 times as bad in terms of fatalities as the U.S. is.
Now, what is the factors in that? The indigenous wildlife, the lack of medical care? I mean, I'm sure it's a number of factors.
Yeah, it's really a perfect storm. So you do have some very, very serious snakes there. The snakes that cause the biggest problems, they vary throughout the continent. Africa's a really, really big place.
Of course.
In some areas, more forested areas, you have things like big elapids, forest cobras and mambas, which are just phenomenally dangerous. And then you have things like Bitis species, gaboon vipers and puff adders and rhino vipers in some areas. But surprisingly, the one that kills the most people worldwide actually is a genus called Echis, so sawscale vipers, Sometimes you'll hear them referred to as carpet vipers, but they're little snakes that are, they're 18 inches long or 2 feet long, and they are uniquely toxic to humans. And they cause different parts of their range. They have fairly different symptoms, but what is lethal in almost all those areas is bleeding. It causes horrible, horrible hemorrhage.
Oh, wow.
So people die of internal bleeding, and those little snakes kill a lot of people. They're easy to miss. They're well camouflaged, so people step on them, or they're bitten on the hands while they're working. And one of the problems with those is that if you have a venom that's primarily hemorrhagic, you can be in really bad shape before it outwardly appears that you're in really bad shape. So that's one of the factors. So one of the factors is the animals. The other factor is the limited access to good quality medical care and everything that goes with that. So the training of the doctors and nurses, the availability of antivenom. Those are two huge factors. And then the funds that people have to pay for medical care. It's expensive. And in the U.S., a typical rattlesnake bite or pit viper bite is going to cost somebody a year or two of income. And it's the same in Africa. Their income is obviously quite a lot less, but it's you're looking at a year or two worth of income to treat a snake bite. And often people just can't spare it, or they have to, they sell the animals that are their livelihood to pay for treatment.
Wow.
And so ultimately, snake bite is a disease of poverty. If you have the same snakes in the U.S. or in Western Europe, the medical systems there are very advanced. They're close to people. With the exception of the U.S., the developed world has healthcare systems that cover the cost of it.
Right.
And even in places like Australia, where you have some of the most potentially dangerous snakes in the world, you have taipans and brown snakes and tiger snakes and death adders. The fatality rate is, it's only about 1 in 200 at the worst. I mean, it's probably closer to 1 in 500 bites are fatal. And that's because they have a good medical system. Whereas in Africa, the fatality rate in the clinics we see it seems to be somewhere between the 22 to 28%.
Wow.
Is the baseline fatality of people who make it to clinics.
I was just going to say, though, that there are so few urban areas compared to rural areas. I'm just wondering how many snake bites go unreported to the medical community. I mean, I would imagine a vast majority.
Yeah, we know that we have a big gap in the data, in that we have people that never go to the clinic at all. They'll go to a traditional healer, and traditional healers are almost 100% of snakebite victims. That's their first stop, is to a traditional healer. And the best case in a traditional healer in a seriously venomous bite, the best case is that they're gonna do no harm. They won't do anything that helps, but they won't make it worse. And the worst case is that they make it significantly worse. And in all cases, they cost time. And time is, especially with some, large elapids or bad bites from large viperids, time is, in the West we say time is tissue. In very rural places, in the developing world or undeveloped places, time is a death sentence.
Right.
We think that of the people that are getting to the clinic, the severe elapid bites, so big cobras, big forest cobras, green mambas and black mambas, we think that there's probably a good number of those people that never make it to the clinic, and those are kind of off of the radar. We don't know how many of those there are.
Right. So I'm just wondering what types of techniques and strategies the traditional healers use. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, it's pretty varied. There are some. I don't want to be at all disrespectful of the traditional healers. Not that they help, but if you have the majority of bites are either sublethal to begin with, or they're from non-venomous species, and you go to a traditional healer and they put a black stone on it, or it's cut with a razor and they rub some dirt into it, or goat dung into it. Sounds pretty awful, but they do these things, and the person survives not only the bite, they also survive the quote-unquote treatment. And the treatment is given credit for saving the person's life. It appears to work.
Right.
And then at the same time, you have people who have more severe bites, and they end up in a proper clinic, and they do die. So a good chunk of them die, somewhere around a quarter or a third of them die. So you have the public perception is that, well, I can go to a hospital or I can go to a clinic, and the healer might save me and I might die in a hospital. So the perception is that you can choose one or the other, and the perception is that your odds are about the same, and the healer costs a lot less. The healer is not going to bankrupt your family. It's not going to cost you to sell your livelihood. And so that's a pretty compelling incentive.
I would imagine, too, there's a big cultural gap among the Native people in the medical community, that there's probably some fear and distrust and things of that nature as well that are a barrier.
I'm not sure how much fear there is. There's certainly a lack of confidence. There's a lack of trust. Not sure that I would characterize it as much as fear as that they just don't have confidence in that the doctors in a proper clinic or proper hospital can help them, or that the care that they'll get in a clinic will be worth what it costs, or it'll be better than what they get from a healer. And so that is that's a huge educational problem to solve. There's a lot of public outreach that has to be done, but that really can't be done by foreigners. That has to be done locally there.
Right. Interesting. So interesting. So you were talking about some of the statistics on the fatalities, and my gosh, I mean, if we ever, I mean, obviously it'd be impossible to gather that data because there's just no way to know, how many snake bites are actually out there. So, it's interesting.
No, that really is a problem. I'm glad you brought that up. So the epidemiology, in other words, who gets bitten in what areas and what numbers and by what, is a huge gap. And there's maybe a third of the countries in the 50-some countries in Africa that we have some idea about what those numbers look like. But then once you subdivide a country into local states or provinces or regions, it gets really, really difficult to figure out. To figure out what's biting people where, and whether the venoms in one area to a species are similar, or they could be treated with an antivenom produced against a species from another area.
That's actually what I was just thinking about, because antivenom is somewhat specialized.
It is, and ideally you're going to want to use a polyvalent, which almost all, I think with the exception of boomslang antivenoms, almost all antivenoms that are produced for Africa or in Africa are polyvalent, meaning that they try to hit most of the important species. But what that means is that you're going to be very effective against some species. But then if there are snakes in areas whose venom isn't well studied or well understood or isn't represented in the antivenom, then you might get lucky and it might work, and then it might not work so well.
Exactly.
You also have problems where a lot of Africa has imported antivenom from India, which is made from completely different snakes, and it doesn't help at all. So there's when I mentioned the lack of confidence, there's people there who get antivenom, and they endure all of the things that antivenom might bring with it, not just the cost, but serum sickness and other things, and it doesn't work.
Wow.
And that's horrible. So yeah, you have to have the right antivenom, but to make the right antivenom, you have to have the epidemiological data that tells you what snakes to make it against.
So speaking of serum sickness, I actually had a member of my crew was tagged by wild Crotalus atrox last winter. Let me think. It was December 15th or something. And so he actually got, we used a device that had been sent to us, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But so ultimately, we used a circumferential compression device, and he was sent to our local hospital, and they were questioning whether or not he was envenomated because the symptoms seemed very minor. They did give him antivenom. We removed the device, at which point it was obvious that he was envenomated because immediately his arm, not immediately, within 20 minutes he was swollen from the hand to the elbow. Within an hour he was swollen up to the shoulder. They ended up, they ended up life flighting him to UMC in Lubbock, Texas, and was sent to triage and then to critical care unit. And and I traveled with him and everything. The ER doctor there told us that the antivenom available in the US no longer really runs the risk of serum sickness anymore because of the because of the genetic modification that they're doing on it. What do you know about that?
Yeah, so that's close. Actually, it's very good to hear of a doctor that knows that. There's still you still too often hear of doctors who are afraid to use antivenom because they are worried about an allergic or immune response from it. That kind of went away almost 20 years ago with the old Wyeth anticrotalid polyvalent, which was a whole IgG antibody, and so a whole IgG antibody it's a bigger molecule. It contains a portion of the molecule that your body recognizes as not, you're not from around here, and so your body has a reaction to that, and sometimes those reactions can be pretty dangerous. That is no longer the case with Crofab. Crofab is an incredibly safe drug. The risk of actual anaphylaxis from it is very, very low. It's somewhere between like maybe 2 and 8%, probably closer to the low end of that. And serum sickness is not very common with it, and when it happens, it's relatively minor. So the allergic reaction with modern antivenoms in the U.S. is not really it's not the concern that it used to be. The bigger concern is among doctors who don't have current information and think that that is still a problem, and then they're reluctant to use antivenom, and that results in a delay in treatment, and a delay is the last thing you want. You want antivenom in large quantities quickly.
Right.
And if somebody waits, an hour or two to see, well, let's see how bad this is going to get, that's not what you want. You don't want to see how bad it's going to get. You want it as soon as possible. So it sounds like you had a good, knowledgeable doctor. Now I expect places like Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, I expect doctors in snakebite country to know that. But occasionally they don't.
Yes. So that's interesting. So obviously the different antivenoms are made in different ways and to perform different tasks. So in other antivenoms, serum sickness still is a very real threat.
Yeah, so there's what's called a FAB, or an FAB, which is the type of antivenom that Crofab is. Very, very small molecule.
Okay.
It works pretty well, but the body clears it quickly. So the main problem you have to worry about with Crofab is redosing. You have to give it kind of continually or repeatedly so that it's not eliminated from the system before the venom is.
Okay.
In other countries, Mexico and Europe and Australia, they have what's called a FAB2 or FAB2, which is a little bit bigger molecule. It is missing the part of the IgG molecule that causes the allergic reaction, so they still tend to be pretty safe. They tend to work really, really well. But there are still a lot of antivenoms, like, for example, the antivenoms that are produced here in Costa Rica are still whole IgG antivenoms. And serum sickness here is no joke. It is a pretty miserable thing to go through. I have a few friends that have been bitten at various times, and you're usually looking at anywhere between 10 days and 2 weeks, 3 weeks of a really bad time.
Wow.
And it's not uncommon for people to describe it as being as bad as the snake bite.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's and obviously snake bites can be, asking how bad a snake bite is. It's like asking how bad is a car accident. Well, a
Right,
car accident can be a fender bender where people walk away,
right.
or you can go through the windshield and be killed immediately. So depends on the snake bite, but serum sickness is definitely a problem worth solving, and it's good that it's been solved in as many places as it has.
Right.
Mexican antivenoms are very, very good. The European and Australian antivenoms are very good, and Crofab is a very, very safe antivenom.
Interesting. So, speaking of Australia, Australia has, I mean, it's a huge continent. A large portion of the areas that are not urbanized and still have a lot of free-ranging venomous snakes. They have a high number of venomous snake bites compared to the U.S., for example. So, from what I know, Australia has been working with compression devices.
Yeah.
So tell me what you know about that.
So this goes back a while, probably a couple of decades or so. Strawn Sutherland came up with this idea of a compression bandage or compression wrap. And the idea is that venom is injected typically subcutaneously, and it moves through the lymphatic system primarily, at least initially. It doesn't go directly into the bloodstream in most cases. And especially with elapids like they have in Australia, which have relatively small fangs, essentially all of the bites are subcutaneous. And the idea is that if you wrap the entire bitten limb fairly firmly, it's not like a tourniquet, the entire limb is wrapped. The idea is to immobilize the venom in the lymphatic system and to prevent it from being distributed systemically. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is that Australian elapids tend to be both neurotoxic and hemotoxic, but typically not very cytotoxic, which means they cause horrible bleeding. They have significant, sometimes very rapid neurotoxicity. But for the most part, they're nowhere near as destructive to tissue as, say, the pit vipers in the Americas are.
Right.
And so if you're slowing down the movement of that venom in the lymphatic system, you're buying time. And you're buying time for patients who might be, they might be out in the bush, they might be far away from a medical center, and time is super important. And the types of venom that are there it's less of a concern to immobilize or sequester that venom where it is than it would be in, say, for example, with big rattlesnake bites in the U.S. Or here in my area, we have a very large pit viper called Bothrops asper. The entire Bothrops genus is famous for just doing horrendous horror movie tissue destruction.
Right.
And if you sequester that venom in its place, typically you're going to do a lot of damage in that place. That's not really the case with the Australian elapids. So Strawn Sutherland came up with this pressure mobilization bandage to hold that venom still long enough to get to the hospital. And the preferred approach is to assume the person's envenomated, get antivenom on board, and then release the bandage. You don't want to release a bolus of venom into the system without antivenom being present.
Interesting. So I know that there was a toxicologist and ER doc, Dr. Hack, that was working here in the U.S. And he was seeing a lot of like military guys that were going through military training, belly crawling through the fields and getting abdominal bites, thigh bites. And by the time the patients got to medical care, they were in pretty bad shape. So he actually designed a device, and he called it the Venom Lock, LOCC, for localized. Gosh, I think it's LOCC. I'm trying to think what the O is for, but it's basically a a circular device, then with a band on it. That it's a circumferential compression device, and that attempts to keep the venom in that area, as you explained. We actually had one. We used it on the snake bite of the member of my crew that occurred, and he came out of it really well. Now, as you and I had discussed previously, there's no way. First of all, he's the first human subject. They had done large mammalian studies, which did appear conclusive, which is why they go ahead and started manufacturing the device. But as you said, there's always the risk of the necrosis and the other tissue damage. However, in my understanding, which is minimal, I would think if you have a dangerous snake bite that ultimately could be fatal, that you may be better off losing your foot or your hand than your life. So, what is your take on that?
Yeah, so in the U.S., the answer to that is different in different parts of the world.
Of course.
In the U.S., for snake bites to be fatal within just a matter of an hour or two is extremely unusual. You might have allergic reactions, but allergic reactions typically only happen to people who have occupational exposure.
Right.
People who are venom workers in particular. Venom workers tend to become sensitized,
Right.
and they have rapid. They can be have a rapid allergic reaction. That a device like that is, it's probably going to be too little, too late.
Okay.
But for the most part, most ordinary bites, rattlesnake bites, you have hours before to get to medical care. It's typically not. You're not usually faced with a life or limb decision.
Okay.
Now there are cases in other countries. So, if you're bitten by, so use a worst case scenario, black mamba in some area of Africa where you might be, say, 4 hours from definitive care, you might rationally make the decision that sacrificing a limb to save a life might be a rational decision. And a black mamba venom is not going to do damage, but a tourniquet by itself can do damage if it's on for long enough.
Right.
So in the U.S., there's no case, there's no typical case where a tourniquet is a good idea, because you're just not facing that life or limb choice.
Okay.
Now the device you described, I've read a little bit about it. I've read a little bit of the studies. The studies, I don't think, stand up super well to scrutiny.
Okay.
And I don't know how well those were peer reviewed. It's like I mentioned when we talked before. It was if you're sequestering venom in an area, it might do that. But is there an advantage to doing that, or does the risk outweigh the benefit? Typically, given the how quickly you can get definitive medical care, I don't think the additional risk to the local injury would usually justify it. It's not something I would use.
Okay, interesting. Well, I know that you have done kind of global studies on the effects of venom, and so that's really interesting input to hear. I've been so fascinated. I've really neglected our our online viewers. Now, because I am on a mobile device, I can't see all of your usernames, which I love to recognize who's here. But it looks like some people who are actually stating their names: Aquaball, Going Youper, Diego Villa, and some other people are here. So they're actually talking about healers versus conventional doctors. They're kind of saying hello to each other. We've got someone from Italy and some other people from around the world. Somebody was asking about if any research has been done on fatal invertebrate venom in any of those countries. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, there are countries where fatal invertebrate envenomation is a real issue. So Mexico is a good example. I think Mexico has about 200 to 250,000 scorpion stings a year. And the scorpions that range up from, well, they range all through the Americas. The species that we have here in Central America are not especially dangerous. They're super painful, I can say from experience. But as you move up north into northern Mexico, into the southwestern U.S., Arizona, New Mexico, you have Centroides scorpions that kill people. And in Mexico, they sting a lot of people.
Wow, so that's okay, interesting.
Yeah, and it's not just, you know, the 6,000 or 8,000 people that are stung or that are bitten by snakes in the U.S. Don't know that we have good data on how many people are bitten by snakes in Mexico, but scorpion stings, it seems that it's around 200 or 250,000 people a year, and some number of those are fatal. They're fairly dangerous neurotoxic scorpions.
What I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know that any genus of the Centroides, is it the Sculpturatus species that's fatal to
Yeah,
them?
Sculpturatus is really bad.
Wow.
And we don't have Sculpturatus down where I am, but I think their range starts, I think, in about the middle of Mexico, middle latitude of Mexico, and range north from there. And especially in children, they're really, really dangerous scorpions.
Wow.
And then down in Brazil, there's some Titius. I think there's 4 or 5 Titius scorpions in Brazil that are just phenomenally dangerous.
Wow, interesting.
Brazil even has caterpillars that can be lethal, venomous caterpillars that can kill people. So yeah, there's a lot of venomous invertebrates that are just no fun.
Wow. Oh, that's incredible. So tell us a little bit. So where are you at on filming the tutorials, or I'm not sure what you would call them, the educational videos for the medical staff in Africa? And I need to take a 2-second break. Tell people about that, and I'll be back in just 1 second.
Okay. So the filming is mostly complete. Now, what we're going to be continuing to do is, as the various members of the team head over to Africa in various countries, they'll do additional filming in the clinics. We have a team, Jordan Benjamin and Ben Abo and Nick Brandehoff, that are going to be headed over to Kindia, which is a pretty good-sized town in the middle of Guinea. And in Guinea, there's a specialty clinic that has, it's been around for almost 100 years, and it's a snakebite specialty clinic. And this clinic, in the peak of the season, which is right about now, June, July, August, they'll see, they may see as many as 2 or 3 snake bites a day. So the team is going to go over there and spend between 3 and 4 weeks at this clinic in Kindia, and they'll continue filming as much as they can of all the cases that come in there.
Wow.
And so, although the main filming is done, we can always use more clinical footage. So the teams, whether they're in Kenya or in Benin or in Guinea or wherever they are, they'll film as much as they can because we can always use more examples of it.
So this is going to sound like a terrible question, and I mean this with all due respect for any medical professional and any clinic that's out there putting in the time and the effort and labor of helping these people. But how big of an issue is sanitation and hygiene in some of those areas that aren't in kind of a more traditional clinical setting, that may not have all the resources that we do in the U.S.? How big of an issue is that?
It's a good question. I don't have any data to answer that in terms of, are there the number of infections that people contract in hospitals, are they much greater than they would be in Western hospitals? My guess is that it is probably higher, but what we do see is people are being given intravenous injections of everything from IVs to epinephrine to antivenom, and their standards of sanitation are good enough It is not what you would expect to see in any hospital that you're likely to end up at in the U.S. But it is usually good enough to solve the problem.
Okay.
That's probably the best way I can answer it.
All right. Wow, that's incredible. Well, so as far as this project that you're working on right now, is that only going to be available to the medical community? Is that more just like professional training type videos?
No, actually, because we're getting funding, essentially the product or the project is going to be funded as it happens. The work product of the series of training videos is going to be available for free worldwide.
Oh.
So it will be available on Vimeo. It'll be available on YouTube. It will be distributed on thumb drives. People are free to copy it and share it. And our idea is to get it distributed as widely as we possibly can in Africa. And most African doctors, they have laptops. They can share it around. They can watch it and rewatch it and rewatch it. And then if those training videos are supplemented with some in-person training, the results are really, really encouraging. So I mentioned earlier that the baseline fatality rate in the clinics that we saw was in the mid 20% range. If you just make Antivenom available to them, it drops from, say, 25% down to about 10%. So just having the Antivenom available drops it by more than half, drops it by about 60%. And then if you have Antivenom plus training, it drops it by about 90%.
Whoa.
So it is a huge reduction. So that the clinic I mentioned in Guinea, where other regional clinics might have fatality rates in the 20% range, their fatality rate at that clinic is only about 2%.
Interesting.
And there have been some cases, in Benin most recently, where over a period of time when our team members were there, we had no fatalities. We managed to save all of the patients that came through the clinic. And that, obviously, you're not going to get it 100% of the time.
Of course, yeah.
But that is to reduce it from 20 or 25% fatality to zero, even for a period of time, is pretty impressive. So that's the problem we're trying to solve: is get them trained, get the funding for Antivenom, and try to knock those deaths down by, if there's 30 or 40,000 deaths per year on the continent, to save 25 or 35,000 of those is a big deal.
Oh yeah. Wow, that's really significant. That's amazing that you're doing that. So as far as your involvement in the project was your brainchild. I mean, are you the one actively going to the locations and filming the project and distributing the information, or has that been handed off to now a crew of other people? How's that going?
Yeah, so it wasn't actually my brainchild. A couple of people had come up with the idea, and Dr. Leslie Boyer was the one who approached me with it. So I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical guy of any description. I'm a science communications guy. So kind of my role is to sit in between the herpetologist and emergency medicine specialists and venom people, and to collect the best information and organize that in a way that it makes sense to be in a training program.
Okay.
We have made a couple of trips. I've been to, we did Ghana, Togo, Benin, and most recently spent a couple of weeks in Guinea. So I've spent a good bit of time over there, but the rest of the team has spent much more time. The founder of the Asclepius Snakebite Foundation, Jordan Benjamin, has spent months and months over many years working with Jean-Philippe Chipot, whose name will be familiar to people who deal with venomous snakes. So Jean-Philippe is on our board of directors, and he's been instrumental in coordinating our access to the clinics there, and primarily in Benin up to this point, but throughout West Africa generally. So I try to leave. I've been there and I've done filming there. It's generally more advantageous to let the doctors make those trips, and so I prefer to have the people who have real experience with wilderness medicine and emergency medicine, to have them there and documenting it as best they can, and then get that material back to me to do what I do, which is to organize it and kind of curate it into training programs. And the idea is that we'll have some number of a dozen or so training videos that might be between 5 and 10 minutes each. Each one covers a particular topic or a particular skill. So we might have a subset of these that are 5-minute modules on here's how to do a whole blood clotting test, or here's how to place an IV, here's how to dose and pace antivenom delivery, here's how to deal with anaphylaxis, here's all the various clinical skills that go into treating a snake bite. We can deal with those each one at a time.
Wow, that sounds very comprehensive.
I'm not sure if I answered your question, but that's
definitely. So tell me a little bit about the Asclepius Foundation. I've heard of it, but I'm not very familiar with what it is, or kind of its purpose, or what it does.
So the Asclepius Snakebite Foundation was created a year ago. It's a nonprofit organization. It's a 501c3 corporation that was created last year to create a legal entity to organize the work of a number of venomous animal and medical professionals.
Okay.
To do things. So having the foundation allows us to do things like fundraising to cover the cost of antivenom and travel and supplies and training and things like that. The people who are involved in it are people who are mostly physicians and other medical professionals who have worked either in Africa. I think almost all of them have worked in Africa for quite a while, or have worked in other areas where the resources are scarce.
Okay.
So what you would call austere conditions. So they're treating time-sensitive, very serious injuries under really challenging conditions, and all of the medical professionals on the team have that kind of experience. We also have a couple of herpetologists. We have some venom specialists. We have some public policy specialists, and we have herpetologists. We have Dr. Kate Jackson, who's been doing herpetology work in the Congo for going on 20 years.
Wow.
Really talk about working under the most difficult circumstances. So all of the members of the team are committed to enabling the doctors and nurses on the ground there to be self-sufficient, to show them how this works, to help them get over their fear of antivenom, because sometimes they're not comfortable with it either.
Right.
Based on experience that they've had. And so our experience our goal is to take the experience that the team has and spread that among as many clinics as we possibly can.
Well, my hats are off. My hat is off to everyone involved in the foundation. Obviously, you're doing life-saving work. It's incredible. It's probably relatively selfless as far as your time and energy and money. It's just something incredibly important. Obviously, everyone who's working abroad in such dangerous, difficult conditions, that's a huge service. And the people that are involved in all of this, this project that you're working on, it's really incredible. And I personally want to thank you for the services that you're doing. And
oh, well, thank you, and I'll pass the thanks on to the team. They really are the ones who deserve the thanks. I'm the guy with the camera who tries to organize it, but they're the ones who do the real work.
So speaking of cameras, I was very interested from a film perspective, what type of audio and camera devices were you using? I mean, do your people, are they just out there with point and shoots? Do you have a specific brand that you equip your people with? How does that work?
Wow, it's an evolving set of hardware. So the first couple of rounds, I'll geek out for a second. We shot with a Canon XC10, which is a nice kind of mid-range 4K camera, as well as a gimbal stabilized camera called an Osmo or Osmo Plus, which allows us to do things like filming as we're driving down very, very rough roads and capture smooth video. So the first couple of trips were filmed with that. Unfortunately, not long after the second trip, my home was broken into when I was traveling, and everything was cleaned out, computers, cameras, and everything. So the subsequent trips, because we're equipping the doctors to try to film while they're dealing with patients.
Yeah, you want small, portable, light devices.
Yeah, so we're going to be using. We have a collection of GoPro Blacks, GoPro 7 Blacks, that are they're internally stabilized. They're a high resolution camera. They do reasonably well in low light, and they can do things like mount them on their chest while they're working on a patient, so they can capture relatively close video. And so I'm very interested to see how that, what kind of footage that we can collect with that. I think based on the tests we've done so far, I'm very, very optimistic. I think it's going to be very good for collecting clinical footage.
Wow, that's incredible.
It really is. It's the kind of thing that we couldn't do, even 10 years ago when I was shooting the Venom interviews. To shoot with a full frame camera, it was the images looked nice, but managing the camera was a nightmare. It was it was difficult to do. And as of a couple of years ago, with the cameras that we shot in West Africa with, it was noticeably better. And now with the cameras that are available today, it's even a step beyond that. So it continues to get easier and easier to get better and better material.
Wow.
And it becomes less expensive.
That's true. I mean, that's very exciting. Well, oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I hope that some of these technology companies are partnering with you guys, because it's very important work that you're doing.
We're working on it.
Well, you have my vote on that. So,
thank you.
I'm dying to know about your life in Costa Rica and what it's like, and some of the native wildlife around you. So obviously you guys can't see him or anything around him. So I'm going to link all the information about his documentary, and also with his permission, a link to his Facebook account. So hopefully you guys can, he has amazing albums of just the jungle around him and some of the fun things he gets to do. Just so you guys can get a little visual here of some of the things that he's talking about. So tell us about, first of all, how you ended up leaving LA and going to Costa Rica, and also just kind of your day-to-day there.
Oh, okay. About, when back in about 2000, maybe 2000 or 2001, my wife and I we had gone to Mexico City, and we had kind of done what we intended to do there, but we still had a bunch of extra time left. So we kind of checked out of our hotel, and we're sitting in the airport thinking, okay, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to, you want to go home? Do you want to go somewhere else? And it's like, I don't know. I heard Costa Rica's cool. Let's go there. And we got on a plane and came. It was completely unplanned, but it happened that the place that we ended up staying, the first place that we found to stay, was about 4 hours north of the capital. Capital is San Jose, and we took a bus up to Lake Arenal, which is up in the northern part of the country near, it's maybe 100 miles south of or maybe 50 miles south of the Nicaragua border. And we just completely fell in love with it. And the people that we stayed with were originally from New York, had recently retired, had built a house there. And that planted the seed that, if we could get out of, if we could become geographically independent work-wise, that would be really cool to do. And so it took a few years to do that. We bought property, I think in 2007 or 2008. Then about 6 years ago, 5.5 years ago, we moved down with the idea that, well, we'll get started building, and then, plans change, and we change what we wanted to do. And so we've lived in a few houses here, ended up selling the property, thinking, okay, well, there's other places we like even better. But so we're out right now. We're in an area east of the town of Nuevo Arenal, kind of out really in the middle of nowhere. I think from where I'm sitting, I can see one part of one house, and then other than that, it's nothing but green hills and forest and a volcano when it's not all clouded up.
Wow.
We have a lot of, well, there's a lot of bird life here, and I don't know as much about birds as I wish I did. We have a lot of them, but we have a lot of snakes. In this area, for a mid-altitude, relatively cool area, we have far more snakes than you would imagine. By far the most abundant are this little leaf litter species called Ninea sebae, which is a coffee snake. And then we have the snakes that eat them, which is one of our local coral snakes. And we have an abundance of coral snakes that you would have to see to believe.
Wow.
I've never seen anything like it. On a typical night, we'll go out and find 2 or 3 of them, and sometimes more. I have a friend of mine that lives a quarter of a mile away who apparently had one lay eggs in her house. We never did find the eggs, but we found 7 hatchling coral snakes.
How dangerous are they?
Well, there's never been any fatalities from coral snakes in Costa Rica. We only have about 5 bites a year. So Costa Rica has about 500 snake bites a year, but a large majority of those are Bothrops asper. Coral snakes are only about 1% of the bites, and there's never been a fatality from them. But that is more to do with the aggressive treatment. Certainly the corals are capable of delivering fatal bites, but the bites are rare. They tend to develop slowly. And so you have plenty of time to get to treatment, and the antivenom works. It works for the most part. So so are they dangerous? They're dangerous, but they're manageable. Their bites are manageable. They're not by any means the most dangerous snake we have. The most dangerous snakes we have are the aspers, the Bothrops asper. In terms of both the number of people it bites, we only have about 5 fatalities a year. Usually most, if not all of those, are from Bothrops asper. We have a couple of other big pit vipers. We have 2 species of bushmasters, but those tend to be primary forest animals. They don't. The bites from bushmasters are pretty rare. When they happen, they are extremely serious.
Right.
They have the best data we have is that their fatality rate for people who are bitten out in their habitat is that more than 50% of those bites are fatal.
Wow.
But fortunately, they don't bite very many people. Bites from them are very rare. And we also have one species of rattlesnake. We have a neotropical rattlesnake called Crotalus simus, which is, it's a neotropical rattlesnake. It's a pretty serious animal. And it bites a few people, but they tend to get treated, and those bites are serious, but they tend not to be fatal very frequently. Overall, we have, just by way of comparison, the U.S. is about 200 times the size of Costa Rica.
Right.
And we have about 20% more species of snakes than the U.S. does. So in a tiny little ink spot of a country, we have just amazing biodiversity. And I think when we were talking earlier, I think my count here within about a half mile of the house, my count is 23 or 24 different species.
Wow.
Of snakes. So it's always an adventure to go out and see what we're going to find.
Oh yeah. So I would assume, you being who you are, you spend a good portion of your free time just out, just being out in the wild. Do you collect? Do you have a private collection? Do you photograph the animals? Do you just observe them?
Well, a little bit of all of the above. I don't usually keep a very big collection. Usually whatever I have in the house is whatever happens to be passing through at the moment. So sometimes I'll have 0. Sometimes I'll have, just recently I had 2 clutches of coral snake eggs here. So I had, with those plus the ones that were removed from the neighbor's house, I think we had 17 or 18 baby coral snakes in the house.
No.
Yeah, so all those have been released. At the moment, the only thing I have in the house is a bromeliad boa, which is an amazingly cool snake. These dwarf boas are just spectacularly beautiful. They're not very common. And there was one that was removed from a restaurant just a couple of weeks ago, so that's here. And I've never kept them, and very, very few people have ever seen them. A lot of people actually, I don't think even know that they exist or know what they are.
Wow.
But they're called a dwarf boa. They're not actually a boa. They're in their own family. It's a not quite a monotypic genus. There's 2 species, but they're just this very unusual, beautiful, beautiful boa-like snake that's not a boa. Very rare and very cool. So that's what's in the house today.
So what genus is that?
They're Ungleophis. So the species here is Ungleophis panamensis. And there's also Continentalis, which is up north of here. I think it ranges from about Guatemala up into southern Mexico. And those I've never seen. I've never seen those before. And even in the 5.5 years I've been here, I don't think I've seen I think I've seen maybe 4 or 5 bromeliad boas. They're not common.
Wow.
They're not common snakes at all.
So how do those look in compared to, say, an imperator?
Oh, well, for one thing, they top out at about 2 feet long. That's about as big as they get. And this one is maybe 18 inches long. It's a tiny little snake. It's shaped like a boa, but it's like I mentioned, they're in a different family. If anybody's going to my Facebook page and scroll down a little bit, there are pictures of it there, so you get an idea of what it looks like. Wonderful. I think most of my pictures are public, so people can kind of scroll through.
Excellent.
But to answer your question, at various times we'll have whatever we'll have in the house is if I get things that are interesting. So we get a lot of cat-eyed snakes, and sometimes there'll be reasons to take pictures of those for documentary purposes or to film them for my library. Then whatever I get called to remove, and I'll get called to remove big tiger rat snakes or bird snakes or oh gosh, I think not counting my immediate area, just around the lake, I think the species count is up to 44, 45 species over the last 5 years.
Wow.
So it could be a huge variety of things, but typically I don't hang on to them for very long.
Wow. So is it just you and your wife there?
Yep, we're by ourselves here. We have a good circle of friends in the area. We have a good number of visitors that pass through, mostly herpers, because everybody else that sees my pictures saying, "Oh no, there's no way I'm coming to visit."
I'm not going there.
Yeah, I'm not going there. You have rattlesnakes in your house, or you have Lancet vipers in your house. I'm not going there. We have a lot of scorpions in the house too, so that has tended to scare away everybody except the herpetologists and other biologists that end up coming down. And usually when they come down, if I'm free, sometimes I'll go out in the field. Most of the time, despite all the pictures you've seen and the stories you've heard, my area is not one of the better herping places in Costa Rica. The better places tend to be lower altitude,
right,
closer to the coasts.
Sounds incredible.
It has its moments. It's not always the easiest way to live. There's there's a lot of things that you go without. Like you mentioned earlier, we go without very fast internet,
right?
That sometimes is a real challenge. We have power outages every day, and we haven't had one yet. That's really, really good. But it's we live about 7 miles down a rough dirt road. So there's a lot of conveniences that you give up, but it's a wonderful, if you can live with that, it's a wonderful place to live.
So what would you say is the best and worst things about leaving, a big city where you essentially have access to anything you can dream of, except for peace and quiet?
Yeah.
Versus just, kind of giving up a traditional lifestyle, essentially, and relocating to an amazing tropical jungle.
Oh, wow. Best and worst. Well, I guess the things I miss, I love California. I love Los Angeles. People trash LA, but I like, LA it's a place that I like a lot. I don't miss traffic. I definitely don't miss that. I do miss things like, being able to, run up to Hollywood for concerts or comedy shows. I miss the fact that there's every kind of food you can imagine in Los Angeles.
Right.
Costa Rica is not really a foodie destination. It's
Hmm.
you don't see Costa Rican restaurants all over the place. The
True.
food it's fairly simple, and for an Angelino palate, it's not super flavorful.
Hmm.
It tends to be pretty functional. So I miss the food. Um, oh my goodness! I just realized I have an enormous wasp next to me on the window. All right, so that's one of the other things. But so there's things I miss and don't miss about California. I still have family in Southern California, so I'm up there a few times a year to visit them, and that's a lot of fun. Occasionally, they come down here to visit me, and they like that too.
So yeah, I can imagine it would be absolutely amazing to visit you. So what about the travel? I mean, obviously you must fly.
Yeah, so the closest airport to me is in a town called Liberia, which is kind of the second city of Costa Rica. That's about 2.5 hours away. Um, there's nonstop flights from Liberia to Los Angeles, and to some other places. You can even get to Toronto or Houston, Atlanta, and a few other places. So getting out and away is not too bad. It's not as far as people think. From Los Angeles, it's about the same distance as flying to New York or Hawaii. It's just southeast instead of west or northeast. So it's about 6 hours away, but I jump on a plane and I'm back in LA in 6 hours. So
Wow,
it's not too bad.
that's really neat. Um, so as far as your plans for the future, what do you foresee? Do you plan to stay in Costa Rica forever? What do you see for your as far as work projects coming up in the future?
I don't know. We like to move around a lot, and so
Uh-huh.
we've been here for 5.5 years. I love it here, um, but I like variety, and there's other places I also love. So we'll see. We might end up country hopping for the next few years. As far as upcoming projects, I that's hard to answer at this point. The Africa work will keep me busy for the foreseeable future.
I can imagine.
Uh, and then what comes after that, who knows? We'll take it as it comes.
Wow, that's really incredible. I mean, my mind is just filled with beautiful pictures of the jungle and medical treatment in Africa. This has been a really visually rich interview for me, even though I've not not
You
gotten
haven't seen?
it at all.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
I apologize for that. I wish I had a way to do video, but if I'm outside of San Jose, there's just not really a way to do it. Sometimes I'll do it if I'm video conferencing from California, but from down here, audio is about as good as it gets.
no apology necessary. This was rich enough as it was, just hearing your voice and your incredible stories. So, where can people go? Obviously, the venominterviews.com.
Yes. So for the information about the documentary, the venominterviews.com is the best place to go. If you search Facebook for the Venom Interviews, you'll find the Venom Interviews group. There's a fairly lively group that has, I guess, almost 10,000 people, and that is kind of a lively group for discussion of professional and scientific and medical and legal aspects of venomous herpetology.
Okay.
It's a fun group, good group of people. And then for the Africa project, the Asclepius Snakebite Foundation, you can find us at snakebitefoundation.org.
Okay.
And you can learn about the team and the projects that are going on. And then as we release the training modules, we'll make noise about it there. We'll make noise about it on Facebook. But we're pretty easy to find.
Awesome. And I know people are going to be. I know that your name is pretty well known, but more people may become interested in you now. Are your social media accounts open to the public for anyone to follow you there to kind of see what you've got going?
Yeah, for the most part, I don't do Twitter, I don't do Instagram. Facebook is really where you'll find me. I find that I can't manage all of those at one time.
I understand.
And so the for the Venom Interviews project and for the other projects, Facebook has kind of grown up as the center of the universe.
Okay.
And so that's I'm kind of a one-stop shop there. You can find me there and feel that you're not missing anything on the other channels.
Awesome. So speaking of channels, it sounds like you're interesting enough of a guy that YouTube would be a really interesting platform for you. Have you considered starting your own channel?
You know what? If there was a way for it to be self-funding in a fairly quick way, I think it would be fun to do. Video production is hard.
Oh yeah.
And it costs a lot of money. And so to the type of video that I do, I mean, to give you an idea of the time involved, every minute of video is between 1 and 3 days of work.
Wow.
And so it's if I can get through a day or two and have a finished minute of video, that's fantastic. So, to spend 2 weeks or something on a video, it's hard to do and justify it when I have other work paying. It's a fantastic medium, and people like you have done a phenomenal job on it. I don't have a big attraction to being the guy in front of the camera. I like producing the material and kind of hanging back in the shadows. That's more my style. But to answer your question, yeah, I've thought about it, but I'd rather put my work out there and not put my face out there.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you for it. So you've given us so much information today. I don't even know kind of where to go to wrap this up. The venominterviews.com and Asclepius is at Snake, and I'll link all this for you guys.
Snakebitefoundation.org.
Okay, awesome.
And those two sites will be the ones to follow.
Well, I have to say, go ahead.
And the Venom Interviews group on Facebook is like I mentioned, is a kind of a loud and lively group for, for the kind of discussion that is kind of only us weird nerds like to follow. So it's a friendly and accessible group. We have a good mix of professional people and enthusiasts, but it's a good learning place. I mean, I learn a lot just from having the group. It's kind of set it up for my own education, and it's educational every day.
Wow, that's interesting. So I have to say, I'm just kind of like struck and enamored with the idea of living in Costa Rica. So tell me just a little bit about kind of, I don't know, what you do for entertainment. I mean, it sounds so incredible. Do you just go look outside?
Yeah, it's pretty hard. On good days, it's hard not to just like stare at the yard and what I call my own personal volcano. But it's I tend not to go out in the daytime because it's not as interesting. I like to go out and hike at night.
Okay.
That's when nighttime is when all the good stuff happens. At this time of year, so starting this month and it'll continue through about December, it's raining a lot.
Okay.
And so we have about 6 months of rain, and the spot that I'm in it has a lot of rain. So the time that I can get out and explore it's very weather dependent. The other 6 months of the year, I can get out and we find anywhere between 3 and 8 or 9 snakes a night. Within an hour or two and within half mile of the house. So wow. That's I'm very, very spoiled.
That sounds awesome. So the rainy season ends in December. Shall I schedule your trip to go and visit you in January?
People ask, should we come in the rainy season? And personally, I love the rainy season. We usually aimed for the rainy season when we travel down here. It really just depends on what people like. Now, different parts of the country have different rainy seasons, but generally on most of the western half of the country, May or June to November, December is rainy, and the rest of the year is less rainy. But it depends on what people like. I like weather that's cool and overcast, and I think it was 11 o'clock this morning before the fog cleared enough for me to see the driveway.
Wow.
I love this weather. People like it hot and sunny. The lower altitudes near the coasts are a great place for them. If for people who are coming to visit, I have kind of a standard set of recommendations about where to go and how to do it. So the where to go, if you're up in the northwestern part of the country in the lowlands of a province called Guanacaste. Guanacaste is the hot, dry lowlands. People don't expect a dry area in Costa Rica, but we do have a kind of dry forest or grasslands area in the northwest. That's a different habitat from if you go down 100 miles south, you're back into coastal rainforest, coastal wet forest areas that has a different set of animals. So if you fly into either Liberia or San Jose and spend a week or two going up and down the Pacific coast, you'll have a good time. I recommend people not try to see too much. Costa Rica is a small country, but getting around is slow.
Yeah.
You're over any time, you're not going to average more than about 25 miles an hour. And so the Caribbean coast, which it looks like it's just right there on a map, that's a good 10-hour drive from where I am.
Wow.
So it can be a long way. So I recommend that people not spend all their time in a car.
Okay.
Do rent a car, rent a 4-wheel drive. Don't rent some ridiculous little plastic Prius or something like that, because you will have a bad time. So you want a decent sized 4-wheel drive. You want 0 deductible, full coverage insurance, because Costa Rica will actively try to kill your vehicle. And I can tell stories about people who have not heeded that advice and paid for it.
Wow, literally.
It's not a difficult country to drive around in, but with the conditions of the roads and slow trucks and weather, it's not fast. Signage is kind of hit and miss, so having GPS is important. If you don't have it yourself, you can rent it from the rental car company. And finally, Costa Rica is more expensive than people think it is.
Okay.
Usually, I suggest a minimum budget of about $200 per day for the first person, and another $100 a day for each additional person is about what you can spend to travel reasonably comfortably here. You can do it for a lot less, but it means moving more slowly and less comfortably, and usually I think is false economy.
Probably not the ideal travel accommodations that most people would think about.
Well, I mean, there's certainly plenty of places here that you'll find for $15 a night with no hot water, which in the hotter areas of the country you won't miss it. Cold water is just fine. But there's some of the accommodations are very simple. If you're expecting 4 seasons for $20 a night, you're going to be sorely disappointed. But it is a wonderful place to visit if you do it right. But those are the main recommendations that I make: self-drive, 4x4, 0 deductible, full coverage insurance, and GPS.
You're wise beyond your years.
I made all the mistakes.
Awesome. Well, do you have any closing? Well, I do want to know what kind of mammals live in your area. I hate to keep you on the line here, but I have to know about the mammals too.
You know what? I don't know a ton about the mammals, although we have some interesting ones. We have a couple of big cats. We have jaguarandis. We actually have jaguars, but nobody ever sees them. We have another cat called a margay that occasionally you'll see.
Those are beautiful.
They are. They're kind of almost a little lynx-like
cat.
They're not much bigger than a domestic house cat, but
yeah,
they're very different. We have an aquatic mammal that is kind of like a weasel, except it's about 3.5 feet long, called a tera, and they're about 3.5. Picture a giant 3.5 foot long aquatic weasel, and that's about what that animal looks like.
Interesting.
We have coatis.
Yeah.
Coatis they're kind of a raccoon-like animal, and you might find them individually or especially east of me, toward the east end of the lake, you'll find them in groups of sometimes as many as 10 or 20 individuals.
Wow.
We have lots of possums. We have raccoons. We don't see raccoons very often, but we see plenty of possums. We have what else do we have? We have anteaters. We have I think 5 species of monkeys here around the lake. We primarily have white-faced capuchins and howler monkeys.
Mm.
We
Are they
have
pretty loud?
say that again.
Are they pretty loud?
Oh, the howler monkeys are unreal. It's if you have the first place that we lived, we had 3 groups of howler monkeys living on and around the property, and every morning at 4:45 they go off, and it is unbelievable. It's unbelievable that a 30-pound monkey can make a sound that is that loud. I mean, they sound like lions. They're just unbelievable. Um, so we have those. We have kinkajous that we see
Oh,
occasionally. We have sloths. Sloths are a lot of fun. We have mostly 2-fingered sloths around this area. 3-fingered sloths are more of a Caribbean, lower altitude species, but we have 2-fingered sloths around here, and we see them occasionally on trees or going across on electrical wires and things like that. God, if I sat and thought about it long enough, I could probably think of some more, but those are the interesting
I'm
ones.
sure. Wow, that's incredible. Well, so I know that you guys said that you had some other places do you live. Have you considered moving back to civilization before you die?
Yeah. So there's some candidates. Eastern Europe might be fun. Um, we were down in Buenos Aires a while ago. I like that a lot. Medellin in Colombia is kind of magical. I like that a lot. Medellin is a pretty good sized city of about 6 million
Mhm.
people, and it's really quite nice. Really transformed to from what it was 20, 30 years ago. Um, yeah, there's a lot of potential places. Sometimes I miss the trappings of a more developed city.
Mhm.
Um, but then I go out and walk at night and find half a dozen snakes and think, well, maybe city life is overrated. So
People. Who needs
I
people?
don't know. The grass is always greener.
Yeah, that's true. Awesome. Well, this was an absolute amazing show. I'm definitely going to link all of your information so people can be obviously watching the Venom interviews and keep up with all of your groups. And thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us today. It's been very enlightening. Hearing your information about all the snake bite stuff was, I mean, my mind is just spinning now with all the things that I want to continue researching and looking into. Also, thank you for all your public service work that you're doing in the sub-Saharan Africa areas and things of that nature. It's awesome. And your team, thank you so much. Incredible, incredible
Oh,
work.
thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I warned you this would probably go an hour and a half or longer, and we're right there. So thank you so much. And yeah, just for being patient and generous with your time. And you were incredible. Thank you so much.
I'm happy to do it. Thank you so much. We'll see you online.
All right. Good to talk
Okay.
to you, Ray. And we'll see all the rest of you very soon.
Okay. Take care.
All right.